evening and welcome to The Report with me, John Rees. On tonight's programme, we have our special report which asks, what is British Islam? And we also report from a demonstration in London over the weekend where thousands came out to register their dismay at the publication of caricatures of the Prophet Muhammad. But first, the United Nations envoy to the Yemen says that a national dialogue to resolve the country's crisis will resume today, 3 days after Houthi fighters took power in a move widely condemned as a coup. Sarah CA has this report.
3 days since the Houthi takeover of Sanaa, and the country's political factions are back in talks. Speaking from the Yemeni capital, UN Special Advisor on Yemen, Jamal Ben Omar, said all sides had agreed to take part in the talks, which originally began in 2012, and was seen as crucial for the success of a US-backed power transfer deal signed the year before.
يسعدني أن أخبركم بأنه وبعد مشاورات مع الأطراف السياسية وتواصلنا المباشر مع السيد عبد المالك الحوثي وافقت الأطراف على استئناف المشاورات للتوصل إلى حل سياسي يخرج اليمن من الأزمة الحالية.
Yemen's Shia Houthi were accused of staging a coup after they announced they were dissolving parliament and forming a new interim government. Following the takeover, Secretary General of the UN, Ban Ki-moon, expressed concern and called for a peaceful transition of power.
The situation is very, very seriously deteriorating, with the Houthis taking power and making this government vacuum in power. There must be a restoration of legitimacy of President Hadi's.
But the group's leader, Abdul Malik al-Houthi, said he was open to all parties playing a role in Yemen's future and said that their takeover was in the best interests of the country. And on Saturday, the leader gave a televised speech attempting to reassure Yemenis that their takeover would only serve as a transitional political period.
نقول للقوى السياسية لا داعي أبدا لإثارة أي بلبلة تجاه هذه الخطوة. هذه الخطوة حكيمة، هي صححت المسار وهي أرست قوالب سياسية لتنظيم المرحلة الانتقالية، وقوالب تتسع للجميع قائمة على أساس مبدأ الشراكة.
But the takeover is not supported by many of Yemen's Sunni groups, as well as Saudi Arabia and other Gulf Sunni Arab allies who view the Houthis with suspicion for being close to their regional rival Iran. Over the weekend, there have been demonstrations across Yemen denouncing the takeover. A member of the Sunni Islah Party denounced the takeover as one-sided.
الإعلان الدستوري الذي أعلنته جماعة الحوثي اليوم من طرف واحد يؤكد أن الأوضاع في اليمن دخلت مرحلة جديدة من الصراع. هناك غالبية الأطراف اليمنية ترفض ما أعلن كأطراف سياسية ومكونات مجتمعية. أيضا من حضروا لا يمثلون ولا مناطق الجنوب ولا تعز ولا تهامة ولا كانوا نسبة ضئيلة جدا.
Yemen has been in political limbo since the President and Prime Minister resigned last month after the Houthis seized the presidential palace. All this comes within the context of a nation still struggling to adapt after former President Ali Abdullah Saleh was ousted in 2012 following Arab Spring-like protests. The country's instability has also drawn major international concern. Currently, Yemen has one of the most formidable branches of Al-Qaeda, which the US is attempting to damage with its ongoing drone strikes. Yemen also shares a long and porous border with the world's top oil producer, Saudi Arabia. And with the potential of a spillover of trouble into Saudi Arabia, global oil prices would set to rise.
Well, joining me in the studio to discuss the situation in Yemen are Alex MacDonald, who's a journalist at Middle East Eye, and by Skype from Washington we're joined by Sama'a Al Hamdani, a Yemeni analyst and blogger, and on the phone from Yemen itself, from the capital Sanaa, we're joined by Belkis Wille, a researcher for Human Rights Watch. Welcome to the programme, all of you. Alex, it's a bit much for Ban Ki-moon to say restore the legitimacy of the previous government, because Hadi came to power after Saleh was removed in a one-man only election, didn't he?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of manoeuvring going on from a lot of international players here. One thing to really note is that the US still not calling what's happened a coup, because they know if they did that, they would be required to cancel international aid to the country, which in the context of the potential instability that could fester in Yemen, particularly with Al-Qaeda, but also with the separatist movement in the south, that's something they don't want to do. So that's one issue. The other issue is that the Houthis, I don't think, really know what they are planning to do next. They've put in this 2-year transitional period because it's a really nice way of kicking the can down the road. But they must realize that they are, they have a minority support base in the country. It's through coercion, luck, and a bit of backdoor dealing and various other factors they've managed to come to this position. But I don't think they even expected they would be here. So they are now having to face potential huge amounts of unrest in the rest of the country for obvious reasons. I mean, frankly, what's going on here is that no one's really sure what the future holds. No one's happy with the current situation. The Houthis, I think, even they're going to start panicking relatively soon because they're going to realize they've got a potential total rupture on their hands. And of course, there's Saudi on the other hand, who are also going to be really panicking about potential of having essentially a Shiite state in the Gulf. I mean, the only person who looked like he had any control or any sort of interest in what was going on was former dictator Saleh. And even he's now backtracked on his support for any of his support from the Houthis and saying that the latest declarations are, go against, they're unconstitutional and they're unjust. And so even he's sort of backtracking now. So it's really hard to see where this is going to go. And I think a lot of people are just running around in circles now. And I think Ban Ki-moon's comments are also going down that route.
Okay. Sam, I just want to bring you into the conversation. It's true, isn't it, really, that what's happened is that the Houthis have enough power to remove a government, but not enough power to form one.
That's definitely true. It's very obvious that they want this to be not called a coup. First of all, they're keeping the old constitution, and they're just changing the parliament, and they're canceling the parliament and the Shura Council, and they've created something that is called the National Council, which is supposed to be a transitional council. Now, the problem is, this is a question that I ask myself and I ask other Yemeni experts, are the Houthis doing this just as a distraction method while they continue to expand on the ground? I think they have a goal they want to achieve on the ground, and they're really focused on doing that. I think all these councils and everything else is just kind of a distraction method. And yeah, they are open. They've invited other political parties to participate in this transition. But what we see is a little bit of confusion, lack of communication of some sort, because the Houthis gave the political parties 3 days to make up their mind to participate in the transition. The parties did not negotiated but did not come to a conclusion. And so the Houthis decided to announce that their revolutionary committee will take over. And it seems that the UN decided to come back and participate in this transition again. Today, there were a lot of talks between different political parties, the UN trying to mediate something between the Houthis and other political parties. Of course, they were fruitless again. And it doesn't seem like things are going to get better anytime soon.
Okay. Belkis, you're in Sanaa, and we hear that 2 of the parties to these discussions have already walked out. Is that what you're hearing?
Yes, there have been different political groups announced since the declaration by the Houthis was made on Friday that they rejected the sort of plan forward as put out by the Houthis, and as was just mentioned, the United Nations is trying to bring everyone back to the table, but certain groups are resisting that. I think the frustration on the side of the different political parties is that on Thursday there had been sort of a clear agreement among different political parties, including the Houthis, that there would be an announcement on Sunday or Monday presenting a plan forward, and the Houthis decided, without informing the other parties, unilaterally the next day to announce their plan forward, as opposed to waiting for something that would come with the agreement of all parties and with the stamp of approval of the United Nations. So I can see why the other parties are extremely frustrated and therefore rejecting the proposal to come back to the table.
Okay. Alex, put this in the context of the sort of Arab Spring as a whole. We've seen a number of variants that when the revolutions get half made or half unmade, in Egypt, it fell back to the deep Egyptian state to kind of be the inheritor of the power. In other places, it's ended in civil war, in Libya, in Syria. On that kind of spectrum, can you place what's happening in Yemen?
I don't think there is going to be enough foreign input into Yemen for it to go into the kind of civil war we saw in Syria. I think Libya is probably a better example. I mean, similarly to Libya, Yemen well, I mean, Libya isn't in theory a poor country, but in practice it is. Yemen is the poorest country in the Middle East. It doesn't have anything like the infrastructure Egypt has. It doesn't have anything like the sort of centralized power or sort of networks that Egypt has. And so it's more likely to fall into a fairly, a relatively dispersed civil war, if anything. The other issue is simply long-standing issues over federalism and this desire by various parties to see the country, power devolved in the country, or even see the country broken up. I mean, that was always going to be on the table the minute Saleh was gone. And now, particularly, one thing about Hadi, I would say, is that Hadi was quite popular in the south with some of the southern movement leaders. Now that he's gone, there's already been orders given to security forces in the south that they should stop obeying orders from Sanaa. So the southern movement is just grown to its, it's going to just grow in strength. And the minute they can actually get something together, they're pretty much going to try and break away, I'd imagine. At the moment, they're just too disunited. But that's an underlying problem that's been going on in Yemen since since the 60s and certainly since the war in '94. So I mean, these are particular issues to Yemen, although some also apply in Libya as well.
Sama'a, is that where we're headed in your take on matters? Are we headed back to the 60s and two countries?
I don't think that it's going to be that easy this time. I think the solution of two countries is kind of becoming less of a possibility the more the current political discourse is happening. I think there's a real danger in the role of international media calling the current Houthi conflict as a Shia versus Sunnah conflict. I think that exacerbates the problem and could make it part of a bigger regional problem. I think we need to look on the ground. The Houthis have come from the north of Yemen, from Amran, and they're trying to push their influence everywhere. But then we have a region called Tehama, which is right on the coast. They've been really treated unfairly and would want their own territory. The governorate of Taiz has resisted the Houthi presence, and they would definitely like to be on their own, probably with the governorate of Ib. Then you have the governorate of Hadramaut, which is in the south, which really could function on its own and has the majority of the country's wealth. Two of the three oil sites in Yemen are based in Hadramaut. And then the whole of the south is called for secession. But the reason they have not seceded, they have a fertile ground for secession right now. But the reason they have not seceded is because the South as a whole is not united. And the political leaders within themselves cannot agree. And so I can see this scenario becoming a scenario of war and conflict. And we have to pay attention right now to the governorate of Marib. And that's supposedly where a lot of the Sunnis and supposedly a lot of Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula are residing right now. And so the next war would be between the people of Marib, probably tribes, probably Salafis, probably Sunnis, versus the Houthi forces. And in the middle of all of this, we see that journalists and Yemeni protesters are being silenced. A lot of people I know were against the Houthi movement. However, because the Houthis have taken a strong reaction to the protesters, they have arrested a few, and there are rumors of some torture taking place. I cannot confirm that, but it seems that a lot of the people who would oppose the Houthi movement are silent for the time being because the Houthis have a very strong and firm grip on the capital.
Okay. Belkis, we've talked a little bit, mentioned a little bit the Saudi interest in all this. Is that likely to become stronger if there isn't some kind of domestic solution? Is it likely to be a covert or overt intervention?
The Saudis have always had a key interest in Yemen and will retain that interest. My understanding is that if the Houthis are able to consolidate power, form a government where they are the principal political leader, you would see extremely heavy pressure from the Saudis as well at this point as the rest of the Gulf for southern secession, because their idea would be that if the Houthis are going to take the country, at least they only get half of it. So if the Houthis are able to consolidate, as I said, I think we will see a lot more active lobbying by the Saudis for secession. With regards to military intervention, I think, as far as I understand, boots on the ground is not something that the Saudis would ever contemplate in Yemen, and is something that I really don't think it is going to happen. That being said, the reference was just made to fighting in Marib. It's an incredibly important governorate in Yemen. It's an incredibly important governorate for the Saudis as well, and of course affects oil extraction and gas extraction. So fighting there, which sounds likely from the amount of forces that are amassing at the moment, would affect the Saudis and would mean more active Saudi participation at the lobbying and political level.
Okay. Belkis Wille, Sama'a Al Hamdani and Alex MacDonald, thanks very much for your views on that. Now, following